Next, I'd like to invite up Melissa Biggs, our CTV lobbyist. She's a managing partner at the law firm of DePino, Nunez, and Biggs. She's represented CTWIA for many years at the State House in Hartford. Melissa Biggs.
Good morning. I am trying something new and I'm going to use the slides. So we'll see how it goes. All right. So I always come up here and I go right into what's going on, which is really unfair because there are a lot of acronyms I use all the time that you probably all hate me for. So I wanted to slow it down just a little bit just to give you an example of where we are. We are in a long session that coincides with an odd number year, 2025, so it also means we have a fresh General Assembly. They just had elections this November, and we will be focusing primarily on the budget. Last week, the governor gave his budget address last Wednesday, so now the appropriations is going through his budget and having public hearings on each agency proposal. So this is the makeup in the House of Representatives. There is two issues here. One, you see that there is one vacant seat that didn't swear in. That's Chris Connolly from Groton area. So there is going to be a special election, I believe, next week in that neck of the woods to fill that seat. However, I'm going to move to the Senate. You're going to see there's also a vacancy in the Republicans. That's in Shelton. So in the end of the month, we will see a state representative from Shelton run for that Senate seat, possibly opening up another House seat. So we are going to have a moving target on who the members are of the General Assembly for a while now, but the makeup is going to be predominantly Democratic regardless of how these two elections pull out. So here is my commonly used abbreviations that you all might hate me for, but they are important. JF deadline means when the committee must take action on a bill. So we talk about it a lot because rarely in Connecticut does any proposal fail. You're just simply waiting for the timeline to pass. So for a lot of the bills that we fight against, we're actually hoping and praying we get to the JF deadline without any action on the bill. There's strike all amendments. You know, I was talking to someone the other day and they loved the idea of the public process and how open and transparent it is. But the reality is in Connecticut, everything is negotiation right from the starting or the introduction of the bill till it gets passed in the House. So oftentimes you'll see a strike all amendment right before any House vote, which really strikes the entire bill and puts in new language. We've seen this a lot for our foreclosure bill in the past, where they'll come up with more compromised language and then try and add it in on the floor before a vote. And the LOB is also just the Legislative Office Building. So if I'm ever asking you to come testify, I mean at the LOB, which is connected to the Capitol. So here are some topics of concern for this session, and I want to throw in a few things that you're seeing on the news that may impact you. One is healthcare costs. That is a huge conversation they're having. They're also talking about the hospital bankruptcy issue that's going on with Prospect. So we are going to see probably a special session on that before the end of the month, as well as more conversations of how we should deal with hospitals, insurers, and pharmaceutical companies. Energy costs is another huge issue. I was just talking about, we also saw Regional Water Authority looking for a specialized subsidy that they could add to their rates just to combat PFAS. So I think there's going to be a starting conversation when it looks to utilities, how we're treating PFAS, and how we handle the extra burden or the extra procedures that they're looking for us to do for having a healthier environment. Fiscal guardrails is something that you've probably all heard on the news, and you're probably like, why do I care? And that's accurate for a lot of people. But the reality is, a few years ago, the General Assembly decided we can only spend X amount of our budget. And there are some people who are saying that they made up that number completely arbitrarily. But the reality is they can't increase spending beyond that. So if they want to increase any funding for any issue, they would have to raise taxes unless they opened up the fiscal guardrails. And it's important because you see a lot of Medicaid providers saying they need to see an increase. So the reality is the General Assembly is deciding whether they need to increase taxes or try and find an agreement to open up the fiscal guardrails. So while it doesn't have a direct impact on you, I think there is a good reality that this is going to take over the conversation this session. Another thing that everyone talks about when we're talking about fiscal guardrails in the budget, and this is the OPM Secretary's favorite question, what's going on with the federal government and how does that impact us. And I think that's really important given all of the grants that WPCAs utilize across the state, including our clean water bonding. Currently, the answer from the administration is nothing has come down from the federal government for guidance. We don't know what's going to continue, what's going to stop. And until that point, we can't make decisions on how to move forward. I will say agencies are starting to look at what money they receive from the federal government and how they should adjust to it in case that money is in jeopardy in the future. So they are trying to make plans for it. It is something that could impact us, but right now we're kind of just in a holding pattern. The other issues we have is the foreclosure bill that we've seen year after year. I want to take a minute and thank Jeff because he held on for a public hearing till 10:30 at night to testify to make sure our voices were heard. Again, this is the bill that would limit when you can start a foreclosure proceeding if someone is behind in their wastewater bill. This year's iteration of the bill is $3,000 or 3 years, which I think is probably the most fair we've seen over the 8 to 10 years we've been battling this proposal. It does appear that this would more likely impact the smaller WPCAs. So if you have a concern, please make it known. We didn't have a lot of people speak out at the hearing. I will say the hearing was focused on other housing issues, not necessarily on wastewater, but we still need additional voices to that debate. So please let me know if you want to just provide written testimony we can share with your state legislators. I'm going to switch up the topics, but reduction in interest rates for delinquency payments. So we've had this be a convoluted conversation with the foreclosure bill. Because WPCAs don't have control on the interest rates that they have to charge for these late payments. That's in state statute. So we've talked about it. If you are upset with how these payments are accruing because someone's behind, let's talk about the interest rates, and let's talk about amending them. There have been concerns expressed by municipalities in the past, but we will see the Planning and Development Committee take up this proposal, I believe, next week to really iron it out and see if that's a better solution for us. Environmental justice. This was a bill that we did a lot of work on last year. The goal of it was to ensure that if you have a facility that would affect the local community, that you have public hearings and you bring them in to participate in the process of any growth. The concern we've expressed is we are not moving any of the WPCAs in the state. They are here to stay. And any improvements we make to these facilities are to benefit the community around us. So we want to make sure we weren't adding additional burdens for facilities to make it better or make improvements to that facility. We were really successful last year in making sure that the bill that passed did not apply to us. I will say there is now a working group within DEEP that we have members participating in, and we're waiting to see if that conversation comes back up in the General Assembly. Right now, it has not. The other issue that's of interest is PFAS. We have been following PFAS since pre-COVID and how it's going to impact WPCAs. I think there's been a large conversation about waiting for the federal government to take a stance on it. The General Assembly has taken a stance on PFAS as it comes to products that are on the marketplace that you can buy, but they have not put any strict requirements on us to this point. Currently, we do not have a proposal in front of us, but it is something we continue to watch out for. I will also say about half of the committee proposals have not been released yet, so we could see a lot of things change in the next few weeks. I know workforce development is a conversation everyone's having. I heard you guys already speak about it today. It is a conversation that the General Assembly is entertaining. We do have now a Chief Workforce Development Officer whose goal is to make sure we have the appropriate programs in the state for the workforce that we need. So it is something that we can look at and participate in if we want to. We've already looked at the certification credits needed. We've looked at how the exams are offered and tried to make tweaks to it. But if there are other ideas for workforce development, please let me know and we'd love to bring them forward. And bonding, like I said, is another issue. We've had the conversation of whether clean water bonding should also be allowed to be used for cybersecurity issues in facilities. We've had that conversation with the department along with the General Assembly, and we're waiting to see how that plays out. But we thought it was a good way to make sure that we are staying on the cutting edge of technology and using this money for the appropriate purposes. So just in case you're ever looking for any bill information, everything is contained on the CGA website, which is actually very user-friendly. So in case you're just curious on testimony that we've submitted in the past, or if you want to find your legislator, it's all available there. And I messed up the table. The one thing I will say, and I know DEEP is speaking later, but there is a huge overlap between DEEP and the General Assembly. We are often working in conjunction with them just to make sure legislators are aware of how policies would be implemented and who it would affect. So there are times that DEEP puts together their legislative proposals, puts it on their website, and then the governor will put it out as a governor's bill, and then we'll have a public hearing on it. But there is a lot of dialogue between DEEP and the other stakeholders as the process unfolds. And I have this of how to participate in the process, but I forgot to put in there, May 21st is going to be our legislative reception in the Capitol. It is a really low-pressure event where we ask you just to come hang out into a room. We invite legislators in there. We'll have food to offer them so we can have just good, easy hallway conversations with legislators about what's going on in your local facility, what they need to know, and how you all can communicate in the future. So it's a really great opportunity for you all to come out. We'll have more information on that soon, but I encourage you to participate. That's just to watch online, but since Jeff's done with his testimony, it's not worth it. And that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions anyone may have, but we have an exciting session ahead. All right, with that, I'll hand it off. Thank you all.